All right, so the pea presentation today, we have Dennis Lange and John Book with us. Just background on Dennis, he's a provincial pulse specialist here with Manitoba Agriculture. He has been involved in the pulse and soybean industry for the past 20 years, working with peas, edible beans, and soybeans. Dennis is also an avid photographer and he enjoys teaching photography in his spare time. Dennis is also known for his collection of almost 130 Hawaiian shirts and counting. So yeah, this is one of the collection, I guess. Background on John Book as well. He's with a risk grain department manager with Roquette Biography. John Book, he is America's raw material manager. He's responsible for Roquette's raw material procurement, trading, and risk management for the America region. He has also been managing regional affairs in regards to financial hedging, physical procurement, and origination, country elevators operations at Roquette for the past 6 years. Before Roquette, John spent 5 years working in the petrochemical business for Shell Chemicals. John has his MBA from the University of St. Thomas and his Bachelor of Science in Finance and Accounting from the University of Idaho. So I'll turn it over to these gentlemen.
Thanks a lot for having me here today. A little different talk than what I'm used to doing here. Usually I'm talking about soybeans, but we've seen a lot of interest in peas in the last couple years, and I thought this would be a good opportunity to kind of introduce peas back to the masses again. So my title today is Past, Present, and Future. So I'll get right into it here. There we go. So why do farmers want to grow peas? Well, in a lot of cases, there's a lot of advantages for growing peas in Manitoba. They can be early planted, generally in April. They're very frost tolerant. Early harvest helps spreads out that workload. Definitely some benefits there. Peas are a legume crop, so no supplemental nitrogen is needed. They're very good fixers of nitrogen. And pea stubble also provides very mellow soil the following year. So that's some of the advantages, some of the reasons why growers are considering peas again. So where do we grow peas in Manitoba? This is a map from some information from crop insurance from 2018. The purple, orange, and pink areas are areas where they produce the most number of acres. They range from 4,000 over 8,000 acres per municipality in those regions. Yields this year are actually pretty good, a little bit down from last year. Provincially, we're looking at about 49 bushels an acre, and in 2017, we're at 53. But as you can see here, peas are grown all over the province. This year, again, we're looking at about 49. The green areas are where we're looking at between 2,000 and 4,000 acres. The yellow areas are where we're looking at under 2,000 acres. So quite interesting to see where the majority of the peas are grown and what the yields are like. Okay, so what do we grow? Well, 84% of the peas that we grow in Manitoba currently are yellow peas. Amarillo, Meadow, Barth, Carver, Lacombe, Agassiz make up the top 5. And what's interesting this year, we've seen a bit of a change. For the last 5 years, we've seen Meadow as number 1 being planted in Manitoba, and this year we see Amarillo being a little bit higher. Those pea varieties don't change a whole lot from year to year. There are some new lines coming on, but these lines are fairly consistent from one year to the next. And we also grow a few green peas as well in that top 10 range. So how does that compare to what we used to grow in Manitoba? Because peas back in the year 2000, we had 120,000 acres. So when you look at the peas that are grown, varieties like Majorette, Delta, Alfetta, Carnival make up kind of the top number of peas that we grew back in the late 90s. We had a lot of semi-leafless varieties at that time. Semi-leafless varieties kind of came in the mid 80s. But what we didn't have was powdery mildew resistance in those varieties. Where now, if you look at the 2019 seed guide, a lot of the varieties are powdery mildew resistant. So we did see some advances in genetics over that time period as well. The slide on the left here is what we showed here previously, where our pea acres are. The slide on the right is a slide from crop insurance, and it shows where the pea acres were back in the late 90s and in the year 2001. You can see here the dark areas here on the map here shows where there is higher concentrations of peas grown in the province. But and comparing it to here, there's still lots of municipalities that at that time that were growing peas that still have capability to grow peas that we don't grow now. So there's still definitely some expandability for those acres within the province. The last 5 years, you can see here what the trend has been for pea acres. 2016 was a real big year for peas in Manitoba in the last few. But as you all know, 2016 was very wet, and peas don't like wet feet. So that average yield was only about 35 bushels an acre. Moving into 2017, our acres dropped off, about 65,000 acres, very dry year, and peas did very well. We averaged 53. This year, we actually saw a bit of an increase in pea acres as well. We're upwards of 80,000 acres, and our yield this year is 49. So definitely some positives. Moving forward, there's been lots of discussion about where the acres might be. We're probably going to see a slight increase from that 80 to maybe upwards of 100,000. Some of those acres are going to come from other crops such as soybeans, for example, because soybeans did not perform as well as they have been in previous years, and prices are a lot lower there as well. Going back into the past, I kind of wanted to show you that progression of how peas and soybeans kind of went hand in hand and how things changed. If we go back to 2002, we had about 174,000 acres of peas in Manitoba, averaging 33 bushels an acre. And we only had 114,000 acres of soybeans. Imagine that. This year we are just shy of 1.9 million. 2004 was an interesting year. 2004, we had no summer. We had very cool season. Peas did actually quite well that year. We had 130,000 acres, averaging 42. But look at the soybeans. And no, I did not forget a digit. It was actually 8 bushels in 2004. So that made so going into 2005, we saw some changes there as well. We saw a drop in soybean acres. And this is one of the few times I've actually seen soybeans and peas be the same yield, which is very unusual. Not a great year for either crop, but it just goes to show you that once we started moving into about the year 2008, pea acres kind of dropped into the range that we're in right now, in that 80,000 acre range, and soybeans just started their climb. So after that, we hit, back in 2013, we ended up hitting 1 million acres. So that trend just continued and just kind of replaced peas in a lot of rotations, mainly because we got into those wet years and soybeans tended to perform better. Now there were, last couple of years were a little drier and peas are outperforming what the soybeans have been. So what about the future? 300,000 acres of peas. Can we do it in Manitoba? Well, some of the first things to kind of consider when you're talking about growing peas is what makes a good launch. What things do you need to do as a producer to give those peas a fighting chance to get the yield that you're looking for? You can't control the weather, but there are some things you can kind of look forward to. What are some of the problems that can stand in your way? What are some of the threats to success that we have to keep in mind when we're growing crops like peas? And what are some of the things that growers need to be watchful about? Is some of the things we're going to talk about next. Okay, good launch. First thing you need to do is you really need to focus on the right plant stand when you're growing field peas. You want to establish that stand establishment between 75 and 85 plants per meter squared, or 7 to 8 plants per square foot. You want those plants to be able to interlock to one another. Row spacing typically 15-inch and less, because you want those plants to be able to reach and interlock to one another, help them keep them standing longer. You'll also want to make sure those plant stands are adequate as well for good weed control. Peas aren't real competitive when they're small. One way of trying to manage some of those weeds is trying to get a good stand and making sure that those things kind of fall into place. When you do end up with low plant populations, you have poor weed control, there's no help from the crop, and also poor standability can go down. So the slide on the left here shows you, a poor stand, lots of gaps in there. Stand on the right, nice even stand. As those plants get bigger, they're going to help keep each other standing and hopefully keep a little less disease out there by keeping that lower canopy open up a little bit more. Good launch means also good location. There are some fields in Manitoba that are prone to flooding that you do not want to plant peas on. This is one of them. This is up in the Beausejour area back in 2016. They did get something off of it, as you can tell here. Maybe it wasn't the best field selection for that particular crop on that particular year. High quality seed, really important as well. Tammy had mentioned earlier, good certified seed to help prevent any weed seed from entering your field. Also, when you're buying good quality pedigreed seed production, certified seed, what you're getting. You know what the germination is. You know that that field has been inspected through the growing season, so you know what you're putting into the ground. So it's another point for having a good launch and growing peas. Early weed control, and that does not mean the horse and buggy. Sometimes you might want to go a little bit more modern equipment for spraying for weeds. But all jokingly aside, pea yield potential declines every week that you delay spraying after pea emergence. This is a slide here from Lacombe, and that shows you how that grain yield can decrease if you're delaying. So being on top of that, knowing what your stage of your peas are, making sure you keep those peas clean right from the get-go. Okay, there are some good weed control options that you do have available. a combination of pre-seed emergent options as well as some in-crop options. Know what your weed spectrum is in your field and choose your weed control products accordingly. A few things to keep in mind: a pea plant can put on 2 nodes in about 7 days under good growing conditions. So if your ideal stage is between that 2nd and 5th node stage, and you're just looking at the plant, how tall the plant is, some growers have missed those opportunities, and all of a sudden now you're at the stage where the product you may want to use on that crop may be too late. So really being on top of where your weed control and staging of the crop is. There are some disease issues that we have to consider as well. Microspirilla blight, a fungal disease that most growers who have been growing peas kind of spray for on a regular basis. It can be quite devastating on a wet year as well. You can see these lesions on the leaf, and then again, it's part of that ascocata disease complex. So that is something that, choosing good seed quality lots, watching your rotation will help in those situations. But, if you have those wet years, you're really going to have to look at putting the fungicide in there to help control that. Again, when you're considering a fungicide, you want to look at the level of infection, what the weather forecast is, what the value is, kind of factor those in when you're doing your fungicide decision-making process. Keep in mind that foliar fungicides work by protecting healthy plants. It does not repair any damage that's already there. So it's something that you have to be on top of and spraying according to that in that early flowering stage to help control some of that disease. Root rots are also a major concern in peas as well, and on those years when things are wet, you may have some Phytomyces, some Fusarium or Pythium issues. Depending on what root rots you have present, things like Fusarium, 1 3-year rotation is probably recommended. But if you're noticing you have Phytomyces, you might be into a 1 6 year rotation. Seed treatments are a help, but they don't cure the problem. Again, here's a couple of slides here just to show you. On the slide on the left here, this is a healthy plant. No Phytomyces showing up. This is out of the same field here. You can see how much of a difference those plants can be affected. The slide on the right here, this was from natural watering, so natural field conditions. The slide on the right here is where the fields were actually flooded. And you can see that these plants in here were definitely where Phytomyces was a lot more present, really affected that crop. So again, this is something to keep in mind. There is research ongoing that are looking at ways of detecting this in the soil, and that hopefully will be available to producers in a few years. But for now, it's just more field selection and scouting your fields to know what you have. Threat to success. We talked about soybeans earlier. Soybeans can be a real contaminant in field peas, so it's something you really need to be aware of. More concerned about contamination risk through cleaning of equipment than actually volunteering. But saying that, I wouldn't want to see soybeans on a field prior to having peas for at least 3 years, just because of that potential for volunteering. Most times peas come off in early August, but some years you might be mid-August, and this year with how early things were, you could end up with some real contamination problems. And because it is a food allergen, some of the buyers really have a concern with that, and it could lead you to rejection of the product. So something to keep in mind. So, conclusions. Breeding and genetics will play a big, significant role in increasing acres of peas in Manitoba. That'll continue on. We're looking at things like protein issues, disease tolerance. Those things will help grow those acres. Can we produce peas in Manitoba at 300,000 acres? I think we can. We have to be selective of where we're putting those field peas and try to follow best management practices. Will these acres increase overnight? No. We really don't want them to either. We want to grow this in a sustainable fashion. Are peas here for the long term? I'd say yes. There has been more and more demand from the world for good quality protein, and peas really fit that bill. So I think moving forward, it's something that we really need to keep in mind. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to throw this last slide up here. In the Manitoba Agriculture booth at the Brownling Curling Club at 11 o'clock this morning, we're going to be talking a bit more about pea agronomy. It's called the Ask the Expert. I'm going to ask Roquette to possibly join us as well. So if you guys have any more questions to follow up with that, we'll save most of those questions for that time period. So now I'll kind of turn it over to John here.